through interest and stuff like this. And they've bought into this American dream where you can have all of this stuff right now and mortgage your future, and they're depending on that there'll never be a recession, that there'll never be a problem. And that's what's caused all of this. Specifically the real estate, they encourage people to take out loans who didn't qualify. Like I saw a statistic that in Colorado alone, I forget the exact number, but it was over 100,000 loans were made through the government agencies to illegal aliens in Colorado alone.
Yeah.
People who aren't even supposed to be here, can't legally be working, and they made loans to over 100,000 illegal aliens.
You know what?
It can't work.
You know of course it can. You know what's crazy about that, what you're just describing? Did you know that while this was going on, they were making all these bad loans, that the people who were in the mortgage business, the brokers, even the people in government, you know what they were calling these loans? They were calling them two things: liar loans and no-doc loans. A no-doc loan was they'll loan you money to buy a house. You don't even have to give them. You don't even have to prove to them you had a job. And liar loans were if you did make an application and give them all your information, you just lied about it because it didn't matter. So people were getting these loans, and this is what's really kind of a little frustrating to me, because you had congressmen and senators who were basically forcing these mortgage.
They were providing incentives and punishments if they didn't make these loans to the non-qualified people.
And then have the nerve that when the whole bubble bursts, blame the banks and the mortgage lenders. Well, you guys made bad loans. Well, you knuckleheads made us make the bad loans.
They punished them if you didn't. They would call it discrimination, and you had to give these loans.
And then, I don't like to call names, but then you had men like Barney Frank and Chris Dodd stand up saying things like this. Well, Fannie and Freddie, they're solvent. There's nothing wrong. Don't worry about it. This is before they went under. Mm-hmm. Don't worry about it. There's nothing wrong. You guys are all knee-jerking and you're fearful. And then what's interesting, Fannie and Freddie collapse, and here's Barney Frank standing up saying, I never said that. That's not what I said. I mean, it's just amazing. When are leaders going to take responsibility for these things and do the right things? It's really got us into trouble. But be that as it may, you and I don't have to operate in that system. We don't have to be controlled by it, and our prosperity is not dependent upon it. And I believe that God will give us wisdom. He'll give us not only witty ideas and inventions like the Word says, but He'll give you strategies. He'll give you opportunities. He'll give you resources. He'll give you new relationships. He'll give you whatever you need to prosper in the middle of this. That's what He did to Joseph. Mm-hmm. Joseph was in a bad economy. Let me tell you something. That was a bad one. Look at Genesis 47:15. The money failed in that economy. That's exactly what the Word of God says. The money faileth. And what Joseph did was, God gave him strategies and ideas on exactly how to deal with that. All the things he did. You know what Joseph actually did? He acquired the entire wealth of Egypt for the Pharaoh through his wisdom. There's a guy that made a profit that year. All the land that the people owned, all their cattle, all their goods, all their resources. And I just trust God in my businesses that He's going to give us what we need when we need it. But it's not going to happen by osmosis. It's not going to happen because you sat around watching television and wishing it was going to happen.
You're going to have some sound financial principles that are contrary to the way this world's operating, because they aren't responding well.
Exactly.
So you have to have that, but you also have to have faith. I've got this little series here. It's a two-part series, In God We Trust, and I put this out in 2009 in response to this recession, and I made all kinds of predictions and said I'm not going to participate, and you know what, here we are 3 years later, and it's come to pass. When the stock market went down 50%, I made 61% profit on our investments in the first 6 months. And people say, you can't do that. Well, we already did it. But, here in Genesis chapter 26, it starts off by saying that there was a famine in the land, and one of the points that I make here, it says there was a famine in the land besides the first famine, which was in the days of Abraham. And one of the points I made from this is this isn't the first famine that ever hit the land. And this isn't the first time we've had a financial problem. And we've weathered other financial problems, and we can weather this one. And I was telling, you know, they were saying this was the worst recession since the Great Depression, and they were comparing it to the Great Depression. And I tried to put it into perspective that the Great Depression had a 50% house foreclosure, and we were somewhere around 4 to 5%. They had 25% unemployment. I think we maxed out at 10 or 11%, something like that. So even though it's bad, people were just screaming, crying wolf, and putting fear in people, and that fear was causing people to commit suicide and stuff. But there had been a famine before. There was this famine. There's going to be other financial problems, and God sustained believers in the past. He'll sustain us in the present, but you've got to operate in faith instead of fear.
Absolutely.
And then Isaac planted in a year of famine when other people were thinking it wasn't worth it, and he received a 100-fold return, and he didn't have any competition. Similar to your business, you had competitors fall out, so that makes your goods even better.
And we were planning and trying to be productive during that time.
And so this is what people have got to do. First of all, they've got to put their faith in God and not in just their job or the U.S. economy or stuff like this. And they've got to really start operating in faith. And then, like you said, God has a way. There are jobs out there. Maybe there's lots of people unemployed, but there's lots of jobs available. There's ways to prosper, and people have to start operating in faith instead of fear. You know, in our own ministry, we've been trying to go on TBN for a decade, and it hasn't opened up. And during the recession, it was last year, it was February of, I guess it was just this year, 2011. Is that when we started?
Yes, yes.
So we went on February 2011 during this recession. And the TBN bill, counting our increased employees and materials that we put out and everything, is $500,000 a month. Our expenses increased during this time. And you know what? Everybody else was cutting back, and we decided this is what we've been believing for, and instead of operating in fear, we took advantage of this opportunity, and our ministry is just exploding.
That required faith.
It does.
It requires strong faith. Do you mind sharing with the people the current situation with the money we have for the new project?
No, that's fine.
Well, no, you do it. You know it better than I do.
Well, we're in the process, you know. I mean, here we are again. We're expanding because that's what needs to happen, is what God put in my heart, and I don't care if there's a recession going on. This is what God told us to do. So we bought this place in Woodland Park. We're in the process of building. The entire project's going to be $45 to $47 million when it's complete, but the very first phase is going to be somewhere around $18 to $20 million. And so during this time of recession, we now have about somewhere between $7 and $8 million. I was asking for a clarification on this, that is available to start towards this. We have $500,000 to $600,000 a month pledge that's coming in, and we're going to start building in March, and it'll be available by October of 2013. So just at the rate that money is coming in and the money that we have, we should have around $18 million cash by the time that building is finished in 2013.
That's awesome. That is awesome.
And you know what? It's like my mother told me right before she died. She was asking about all these things that were happening. And she was asking, and she says, "Andy, you know this is God." And I said, "Yes, Mother, I know this is God." And then she stuck her finger right in my face, and she says, "You aren't smart enough to do this." And it's absolutely true. But you know, the one thing I have done is still believe God, and I'm not letting the economy and those kind of things dictate or put fear in me. We've made by far the largest expansion, the largest commitment to doing things we've ever done. And you know what? God has come through.
You know, one of the things I appreciate about your faith and what you've done over the last few years, you know, I remember the day you called me several years ago to ask for my advice about borrowing the money to remodel this building. Mm-hmm. And my answer is always the same: I don't like to borrow money. And you made the decision that we were going to do this with cash. And I'll never forget this because we didn't have it.
No.
When you made that commitment and you said to me and to the other board members, we're going to do this, our partners are our bank. Remember the word we got? Mm-hmm. You got from Dave Duell. Dave prophesied that. Well, you know, I remember at that time, I remember praying over that and thinking about that later. And you just have to tell what God did. This is so awesome. In 14 months, from zero, not starting with $1 million in the bank, from zero, we financed one of the greatest expansions in this ministry's history during that 14 months and set aside $3.2 million to do what you see in here now.
And at the rate we had been saving money, I sat down and figured it out. If we had continued at the same pace, it would have taken me over 100 years to come up with $3.2 million. And we came up with it in 14 months, and it was a step of faith.
Now, let me illustrate something using that as an example for people watching and listening to us. My Bible says God's not a respecter of persons. If God will do that for you, he'll do that for me, and he'll do that for these people watching us. In your personal finances, here's what happens to us. Here's what I really believe happens to us. We get our eyes on what we see. If Andrew got his eyes on what he saw, then we didn't have a dime to do this. The easy way out would have been to go after the world. The world was willing. We could have found money to borrow. The world had a supply for us.
The day after I made the decision not to borrow money, I had somebody call me and offer me $4 million, and I turned them down.
Turn them down. What's this? That's the world's supply. The world's got a supply. Listen, I can remember a time just in the last few years where if you could walk into a lender, a bank, and stand up and breathe, they'd loan you money. The world has a supply, guys. It's called credit cards. It's called debt. You can go out there and get that if you want to, but here's my advice. If you go use the world's supply, then don't be surprised when you get the world's results. If you'll choose God's supply like Andrew did that day and choose God's supply to meet your needs, then here's what happens in that environment. Instead of it taking you 100 years to save the money that you need, God does it miraculously in 14 months. That is the stark picture of the difference between God's supply and God's word and the world's supply and the recession and stuff we see going out there right now.
And instead of me having this big debt over here and these large payments, now I've got assets. And ever since we did that, you're on the board and you see it, and you provide these ratios, we are just one of the most solid ministries that I guess there is.
Yeah,
awesome.
I so enjoy getting the financials every month. I just sit in my library at home and just kick the wall. Dear God, I'll holler at Patsy. She'll be in the car. I say, you don't believe what God's doing. You know what? Andrew must be holding his mouth right or something. I don't know what the deal is. I mean, I look at that thing, Andrew, and what I do every month is, I think it's my responsibility on the board to watch our finances. That's just what I can do.
We depend
That's
on
how I can contribute. And when I get that financial and I start running those ratios, I'm just like, you know, I would predicted that it would have been here. And I'll give you an example, our debt to equity ratio. I'd made a prediction in my own notes at home that we would have been at a certain level by June of this last year. We were double that. I mean, and listen, I'm stretching myself and adding about 15% and believing in God, and your faith's strong.